as Jeff said at the start, it is a complicated situation. We don't know what to do. Everybody's trying to do something, and something is respecting individual's choice. So that's how I see it in short.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you bring up privacy agents, what I call privacy agents. I think other people call them, registered agents or different things, but I like to call them privacy agents because I think that sort of uh, is a good moniker for them. But essentially, people that are organizations that help consumers exercise their data subject access rights. Um,
Mm-hmm.
because right now we have lots of rights, consumer rights, privacy rights, but in order to exercise them with thousands of organizations that may have our data, it's just untenable. It's impossible to actually exercise those rights in any reasonable amount of time. Especially when it's not just a simple click of a link, when you have to somehow prove your identity or go back and forth with different organizations. So, yeah, I mean, I think this kind of global opt-out signal could help. But you sort of hit, one of the points that I think is a trouble point, Punit, is if I'm opting out, what exactly am I opting out of, and how does the organization that's listening for this signal know that it's me that is opting out? Um, so I guess if it's just opting out of like tracking, right, that's relatively easy to do. But and if it's opting out of the sale of my data, that's, I guess, relatively easy to do. Um, so maybe I'm making a little bit too much of that in terms of identity.
No, no, you're
but
not.
but but there is a question there, right? I show up with a browser on a website. We have this problem with Web 2.0 of when you connect to a website, it's not you that's connecting to a website. It's some sort of an application or a device that's connecting. It's not necessarily you. The website doesn't know that it's your phone necessarily. They think it's your phone, right? They think it's your browser. They think it's you using that browser. They think it's you watching the TV, but they don't necessarily know for sure. And so there's a huge identity problem. Um, and so if somehow your TV is sending an opt-out signal, how do they know it's you that's sending that signal, when it not your daughter or your wife or somebody else in the family? And if it's you using the browser, how do they know that it's you that's on the computer? Should they be opting out your entire family or just you? Right? You get this sort
Yeah,
of
that's an
identity
interesting
issue,
point.
right?
That's an interesting point, but more and more, or increasingly, as we are seeing, we are in the society. I mean, 10 or 20 years ago, there was a phone that one person would have, or almost everybody in the family would share, or two people would share. There would be a TV that one person would share, but the more and more it's getting more personalized, more specific. So, one device per person, or rather, multiple devices per person. Earlier, it was multiple persons per device.
Yeah.
So that is changing, but I would presume the premise here is whosoever is behind the device, and since we track behaviors, clicks, and so on, the device, or in as you be very specific, the application tracking the activity can very well judge if it's me using my PC or somebody else using PC. So it's for me immaterial who is behind the device. The important part is whosoever is behind the device, his personal information is protected and we are not misusing that personal information. So by creating that challenge or the confusion around if it is me or my son or my wife or my girlfriend or my friend, that's okay, but how many times? Predominantly, if it's my TV in my home, it'll be me or my family. So
Yeah.
so
Well,
implementation has to be around that. If I have registered, let that be a global opt-out for that device, for that IP, for that matter.
right. And I
That's
think
how I
you're
see it,
right.
of course.
I mean, I'm bringing up these issues because I've seen other people, specifically people in ad tech, raise them. I'm not sure that they're that big of an issue. or that they can't be worked around. I think maybe it's more of a smokescreen, because if they're actually targeting advertising to us, right, they're obviously
Yeah.
able to figure out to some degree who the heck we are, right, and to target ads to us. If they can figure that out to that degree, they ought to be able to figure out who they are to stop tracking us, right, or to opt us out. So to the degree that their advertising actually works, then the opt out should work just as well.
That's how I
So
think.
yeah, right. So, but I think it is good to actually think through that issue, because identity is still important. And let's talk about the actual mechanism. So is the mechanism a signal in your browser? Is it a setting in your browser? Is it a setting in apps? I mean, I'm pretty technically savvy, and I still don't think I get exactly how this is going to happen. I mean, I can see ways that it could happen, but I'm just not sure the ways that it's supposed to happen. Colorado is supposed to promulgate some rules, but they haven't yet. I don't know that California has said exactly what signal people, businesses are supposed to be listening to. I know Connecticut hasn't done anything yet. So I'm assuming that they're going to adopt something like the global privacy control system that's been promulgated. But I mean, who knows? Maybe it's something different.
The way I see is it doesn't have to be a global. Global means it's available for multiple purposes from multiple sources, but it'll be highly unimaginable for me to say there'll be one global list and that's where you go and find Jeff wants it, Punit doesn't, and the other thing Punit doesn't want and Jeff wants it. It's not going to work like that.
Yeah.
There would be, end of the day, multiple sources of information. You would go and check on that, and in an internet age, digital age, it doesn't matter it's one source or multiple sources. And coming to your earlier question on how granular it is, I mean, it may be that I'm interested in lending offers and I'm not interested in credit card offers, for example. So the list will have to be reasonably granular as we talk about consent, not bundled, very specific. List will have to be, do not call me on my mobile phone, simple. And then it's clear, do not call me on mobile phone, approach me by emails, or don't even send me emails. That's fine. So there will be one, multiple sources, and two, multiple granularities. And some people will choose the highest granularity. Some people will choose the most granular. Like last week, I think a couple of weeks back, you guys were talking about cookies. So now some websites you go and they are like, you have just, we use cookies. That's the level at which they tell you. And you have either a yes or a no. And then there are some, the other extreme, you go in and you have to untick everything from legitimate interest to normal. So that's also consent, or that's also opt out. So it's an interpretation of how deep or how granular the company goes. But the global lists, and I don't say lists would mean that's how it is. Like for me, on my iPhone, there's this thing saying do not track me. So for me, it's a global list because from iPhone perspective, all the apps that I use, they follow that list.
Yeah.
So all apps are supposed to. Then if I'm using my PC, if there's a similar mechanism and anything I use on my PC that listens to it, that's another global mechanism. But now imagine my PC and my phone are from same provider, say Microsoft or Apple. So am I supposed to tell them again that I don't want to be tracked on phone, but I want to be tracked on PC? No, it should be the same. So for me, global does not have to be regional or international per se. Global has to be serving multiple purposes or multiple uh, objectives, or same objective in multiple ways or for multiple apps. That's how I see global.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, I think that's the way it works too, but I'm sure that we're going to get some different interpretations of that, right? So even if it is a browser signal, is that one signal that says don't track me any place ever, or is it going to have 20 different signals that says don't track me this way, don't track me that way, this company can track me, but this company can't track me? This company can track me on their website, but it's okay for analytics, but not for marketing. This company can, is it one cookie that says don't track me anybody ever, or is it one cookie per company, or is it 5 cookies per? I mean, 5 signals per
Yeah.
company. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's no clear answer. I mean, we see that the GDPR has been in place for 5 years, and still we have debates on what is a legitimate interest or how consent should be used. So same way here, we will not solve it in next 1 year or 2 years. The debate will continue, but we have to be pragmatic also, that it cannot happen just because there's a law. The things will need to evolve, and things will need to be granular. I, as a person, will not say, don't track me. In certain cases, I would like not to be tracked. And in certain cases, I am okay to be tracked. For example, if I've lost my way and I'm trying to find my home through any maps device or maps, say Google Maps, Apple Maps, whatever, then I want it to be tracked. Now, you cannot say the global list says do not track, so we are not going to guide you your way home. Same way, if I'm using self-driving car and I say, I would be tracked in that case, even though I'm the same person. So privacy or even tracking or even consent is always contextual. It's in a certain context, I make a choice and there it stays.
Yeah. This, I don't want to go too far down this tangent that I'm gonna talk about, but I want to bring it up because it goes back to identity. And I really think that if we can ever solve identity and get to a place that's something like self-sovereign identity, that I think you and I have talked a little bit about in the past,
Yeah.
we can actually solve a lot of our privacy problems. Because imagine if you had sort of an identity wallet of some sort, right? And you could have a punit identity, right? That was your entire identity, right? And then you could also have a pseudonym, right? That is, I don't know, something that is sort of like your pseudonym that you use on social media. And then you could also have an anonymous version of yourself. Then if you had those sort of 3 different options, you could, when you go to brands or companies that you want to give information and be tracked, you could give them your full identity. And if you want to be, tracked, but maybe not targeted behaviorally, only tracked, in sort of like a small amount of way, you could give them your pseudonym. And then they could, do some contextual targeting, but they can't really track you behaviorally. And if you don't want to be tracked at all, you just log in as anonymous, right? So you actually
Indeed.
have control.
Yeah. So it's identity that chooses what elements are shared and what elements are not shared. Sometimes I may be open to share my name, but not my date of birth. And even if I choose to share my date of birth, I would certainly not be open to share my credit card information. So even when we say I'm open to share, there are boundaries around how much and what I'm willing to share. Chris was about to
Absolutely.
say
Yeah, it's
something.
not just 3, right? But that's sort of 3 representative use cases.
Yeah, it's always representative and contextual.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. I mean, I think this global opt-out idea is great, but how exactly is it going to be implemented seems to be uh, unclear. It's very unclear right now. And that lack of clarity is going to be a problem because businesses are going to implement it in a variety of different ways. And that's going to be, it's going to be a mess until enforcement starts happening, and that'll clarify things. But that could take years. Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you earlier, Punit, and we got sort of past it. Are there global opt-out rules outside of the United States, in Europe, for instance? Do you know of any global opt-out signal rules that are coming online?
I mean, as it depends on how you define global. Like in India, there's a do not disturb because there were a lot of phone calls being made by companies and sales companies chasing them. So what they've said is list your phone number in the do not disturb. That's the intention, but then even companies are saying yes, it's for me. But so there is that debate in Europe. When you talk about it, there is a lot of debate around consent, but that when you say global opt-out, there are some companies which are mushrooming who say we will become your data your choice kind of thing, or my data my choice, and they say register with us and we will give you a dashboard on where your data is and you can control, just ask for calling back your data or deleting your data. So there is that directional per se, but the GDPR or most European laws are not specifically referring to the term called global thing. But the essence of any of these, as we've been saying, whether it's global privacy opt out or global consent or do not disturb or do not track or do not sell per se, is the same. The means or the voice may be different. Some people are thinking too globally, but when we think globally, we are talked about the other challenge. What is global and how does it get implemented? Who maintains that list? Is it the authorities? Is it going to be a company? And if it is, even if it is implemented, let's imagine somewhere, how granular is it? Is it opt out, meaning no calls to me? That means if you pick my number and you say, hey, we want you to be on your our chat show, can you ask me? Oh, so there has to be an element of common sense along with it. You just can't rely on black and white rules. I wish it was possible, but it won't
Yeah.
happen ever.
Yeah, I mean, even the do not call list stuff in the United States, is to some extent a global opt-out, but it has rules too, right? You can still call people if you have like a business relationship with them, for instance. That's an exception, and there are some others as well. Um, there is actually a proposed piece of legislation in the United
Mm-hmm.
States. It hasn't gotten a huge amount of traction. I'm actually going to talk about it next week in a webinar that's called the Delete Act. Not a whole few people actually know what the heck it is, but it is actually a proposal that the FTC administer a global opt-out list. And so all Americans could essentially go to this global opt-out list and say, don't track me. And the FTC would control this list. And then if anybody tracks you or targets you, I guess, I forget exactly how that works, then businesses could be fined by the FTC directly. So it would be like a do not call list, but it would be a do not track list that the FTC would enforce directly, which is an interesting idea.
Yeah,
So,
but the question is, who is FTC to maintain that list? Or why should I allow FTC to maintain that list for my data?
well, that's a good question. I mean, a lot of people think that the do not call list doesn't work particularly well. So why should I give them my information for the web as well? Yeah, I mean, well, I like the idea that it's global. Do they have enforcement powers though? Hmm, that can be interesting for calls though. But what does that work for web or for advertising or things like that? Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. For sure. I certainly have it. I get calls every day. Um, what else can we talk about on this topic? You know, I'm wondering as we sort of move into this global opt-out arena, will the consent management platform organizations, will they step up to this task and actually provide solutions?
Hmm.
Because they're the intermediary that potentially could solve this, right? I would think, or could promulgate the right kind of rules to make this thing work. they've got their tendrils into hundreds or thousands of organizations, the larger ones.
I think that's a good point. I mean, having a good consent management framework at an organization level does simplify how you run consent, how you use data, and so on, without having to, or in addition to having a global privacy or global consent list or global opt-out list, whatever we like to call it, or do not track list. So if you combine the two, you as a company create a framework, how you will use data, where you will ask consent, how you will ask consent, and you use it in addition to whatever global information you are getting. It becomes much more personalized experience for the user. It can even be a simple question saying, we learn that you have opted out of this thing, but we believe we can add you value. Would you like to receive a newsletter? If the person says yes, that's good. If person says no, that's fine. And there can also be, do not ask me questions like this. That's fine. It stops there.
Yeah.
And if somebody doesn't click, do not ask me questions like this, then next time there can be a question. Hey, there's an interesting podcast we saw you were in. Would you like us to help you understand? Because I see that if you see Google, Microsoft, or Apple, they're doing some stuff like this. I mean, in Microsoft Outlook, if you use, every morning you get an email saying, you sent these emails, we believe these are the actions pending for you. Now you do have a choice to opt out, but usually people will say, this is helping me follow up my emails, so let me keep it. But what is it doing? It's scanning my emails essentially, which we are all talking about. Do I want an opt out? Do I not want it? So there is definitely personalization. There's definitely value in creating a consent framework and giving value. If you're demonstrating value, nobody has an issue. The issue is when you're bombarded with emails. Like nowadays, there's a trend of LinkedIn, what do you say, newsletters, if I call it like that.
Yeah.
Everybody is creating it. Essentially, what is it in my view? It's articles, but they de facto go into all your subscribe channels, subscribe people. So do you want that? Do you not want that? But if you're giving people option, I mean, if you have 5,000 connections, I'm okay to receive, but you should also need the option, please don't send me any more emails on newsletter. So that's a global opt-out. So there is a consent framework, there is a global opt-out, and the two have to work in conjunction with each other. One is not better than the other. Both are together better and serving the client, but think of the client rather than the opt-out.
Well, that's what I was just thinking as you said this, right? That uh, the question I asked was, could these consent management frameworks implement the global opt-out? But really, they have to work together because you're actually going to have conflicting signals and disparate signals at times. So what if I actually opt into a newsletter from some organization, but then I opt out from all tracking from the same organization? How do they handle that, right? Am I telling them that the most recent signal is the one they should listen to, or are they different granular things that should be handled differently?
I would think it's always granular. It's always granular. It's always contextual. There can't be just one thing saying, I don't want emails and I don't want to be called. It cannot work like that. It's in a context for a purpose. I mean, we talked about the Google Maps or the, I lost my way and I want to get home. Even if I said, don't track my location in that moment for that app, I want to be tracked. Maybe when I reach home, I want to say, please switch off. But in that context, you just cannot say the FTC based global opt-out list says you cannot be, we cannot get you home. So the person would be really mad, and you can't ask the person then to go and update his the global opt-out list. And because if you do that, let's imagine we do that hypothetically, then it will take a few minutes to update. Then it will so you don't want me to be standing in a jungle just because my global opt-out list is or lost on the way. So there has to be some practicality around it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually just saw a company is doing that for password and identity authentication. They're actually like doing some sort of device tracking and I guess other metrics as well, some sort of like behavioral training. And they claim that they can use that information instead of using passwords or faces or things like that to authenticate you. Some sort of location-based information as well as other types of behavioral activity that you use. Yeah. I'll send it to you. I had their URL up actually just before this session. It's interesting. It's an interesting idea. I don't know how well it works. They claim it works great, but I mean, yeah, it's an interesting concept. Of course, it means that they've got to track you, right? And profile you in some probably interesting behavioral ways. So there's that. Yeah. I don't know. I just call it the stage. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys. There we go. All right. Hey, everybody.
Hi.
You know, you guys have brought up some really good thoughts here, and you know, yes, in Chris's wonderfully perfect world, we would be able to click a button and say, "You don't get to know anything about me unless I tell you it's okay." Um, very honestly, having watched both of my kids grow up in the technical age versus what I did, I think that there is a lot of change of thought in today's younger people that think, oh, I need the convenience before I need the protection. I need to be able to do this. I need to do this because I'm doing everything on that blinking phone. You know, I don't see a time when they put down the phone. That's also that. But in that same aspect, how, you know, visibility, yes, my kids listen to me harp nonstop. Don't give them your data. Don't accept consent unless you've read the stuff. But as a general population, how do we get people to understand that, yes, you can have convenience, but monitor what data is going out there? And then the second half of that is, you know, you guys brought up the fraud detection. Really, to do fraud detection properly, you need to, you know, the companies need to have just about everything about you. They have to know exactly where you are from an IP address. They have to know your geolocation. They have to know what type of device you're signing in on. And, you know, there's companies out there that, applications out there that are mobile applications that gather all of this data that don't really make it clear to the people in their privacy policy or in their TNCs that they're doing that. And then they're turning around and handing this data off to data miners to make money off of. You know, I mean, we could go on forever about data brokers, but throw all that out there and just kind of let you guys go with it from there.
But you say a very important, no problem. You bring in a very important point. It's not data by itself that usually has value, but data when connected with other data and all the relevant data when it's connected, that's when a fraud happens. And that's when the mess up happens. So the idea of all these things, consent, whether it's and making it granular, is you cut out certain elements and make sure that even if you aggregate that data and that connected data is not relevant anymore, and more importantly, it's not possible to connect those pieces of data.
Right.
So when we talk about fraud prevention, you cannot control data, but you can encrypt certain fields, you can secure certain fields, you can mask certain fields, you can hash certain fields, pseudonymize or anonymize certain fields so that those connections are not happening, and hence the data remains protected. And that's where the global opt-out also comes in.
Mm-hmm. No, great point. You know, I would love to see us get to a point where we can get to that.
Yeah.
I just think that there is a lot of learning opportunity for businesses to do things the proper way. And sometimes they don't want to because it's too much work or it's too hard, or, you know, I'm not going to make money on marketing. And
I think it's
you know, so
one.
Yeah, well, yes, I'm not going to make money on marketing. That's a huge one.
And also sometimes is the intention, because they look at what's the risk of not doing it. Now, our big tech are getting fined in big terms, sometimes in Europe, 100 million, 200 million, or 500 million sometimes. But for them, it doesn't matter. But for a small company, even 10 million matters. So it's the scale at which you play, and it's the scale at which you, or the amount of risk you are willing to take.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Well, one thing I think that's going on is people need to collect a lot of information. Let's just look at ad tech specifically. I think part of the reason that they want so much data about us is so that they can do this highly precise behavioral targeting. But I don't think that really results in a whole lot more sales than if they actually had better marketing. I think what the precise targeting enables is crappy marketing to have a better throughput. But if you look at a lot of the research, it actually says that contextual advertising really works pretty well. The problem is that somebody else is doing behavioral marketing, and so he's taking the ad space away from somebody else who wants to do contextual marketing at a cheaper rate. And so he's getting your attention for a higher price, and therefore potentially getting your attention in that way. and maybe that works, but it's probably, if you had a better product or better marketing, you might have been able to get that attention in a more cost-effective way. I had a really good conversation with Abin Varghese last week. He's a data science machine learning guy who just started a new podcast on privacy engineering, and those kinds of things. And we actually talked about those kinds of externalities. You'd probably be interested in that conversation, Christian. And we actually talked about, could you create problems that tried to optimize for user happiness rather than user clicks? And
user happiness.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, you have to figure out how to connect to those things. But if you can monitor user happiness or user satisfaction, couldn't you actually optimize for those things rather than just eyeballs, just attention? I mean, right now the problem is that we have this attention economy, and all they care about is attention, right? But there are probably ways to get around that. If we could get past this attention economy, everything is about ad tech, but it doesn't have to be, right? If you could actually improve people's lives, they would pay for it if you could actually prove to them that's what was going on.
Social engineering for good.
Right.
You're also an optimist. Social engineering for good.
I like it. It's actually a good idea.
It's good to attract attention, but social engineering for good. I mean, I have hard time in being able to say yes, it's feasible. Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Well, how can we wrap this up, guys? What can we say about global opt-outs that would help our listeners or people that watch this on replay?
I think let's take a snap, each one of us, maybe 30 seconds, if you're okay.
Yeah,
For
go ahead.
me, I think if I may start, for me, it's always about choice. Privacy is about choice, and choice needs to be respected. Whether it's at a global level, whether it's at a local level, and that choice is also contextual. Some things I like to share with my wife, some things I don't, some things I like to share with my friends, some things I don't. So it's always contextual, and that choice needs to be respected. It's not going to be global, meaning absolute no or absolute yes, and that's what we need to remember. While these lists are a means to get there, they will never be perfect and they'll never be 100% certain.
I think my takeaway from this, the insight I gleaned from our conversation is that global opt-out is coming. There's really no way to forestall that. It's going to come in some form or fashion. But the consent management platforms really need to play a big role in this. And they could probably do well to take a leadership position. And one other thing that I didn't really get, and I'm glad you brought it up, is that privacy agents may play a bigger part in this than I had considered. And since I am connected with several of them, I'm going to have to think about what that actually means, which is interesting to me. So I'll have to think that through a little bit further. Kim, Chris, either of you want to something?
Okay. Thank you. I think awareness. I think that there has to be more of awareness, not only on the individual level, but on the company level. They need to be aware that they need to do these things, that this is where things are going. Companies tend to take a defined look at how they process DSAR requests, how they do their consent. And like you mentioned, Jeff, the privacy agents, granted, from the receiving end of some of those, they're great, but they're also, let's follow some simple rules of how we engage and go forward. But I think awareness is going to have to happen along with this movement, because if we don't have that awareness, we can, as the professionals and as the industry people trying to drive these things, if we don't help make sure that people understand why, it's going to be one more thing. It's going to be one more thing I got to do. Why do I need to do this?
Yeah, that actually makes me think of something. So if for instance, Firefox or Opera or Brave or with these different browsers that are probably going to enable these signals, if they enable them by default, and so that all their users are all of a sudden opting out of everything, and the like I said, the default is that everybody's opted out. Is that going to be the way things should be? That's going to be an interesting decision, right, for these companies. I mean, privacy by default is a good thing, in my opinion, right? But there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be unhappy with that if that's the case. Thanks, Chris. I think we had some good summations there. I appreciate your attendance. This has been episode 15 of Your Bytes, Your Rights with Chris and Jeff. And today we had Punit Bhatia and also Kimberly Lancaster with us. So I hope everyone has a great weekend. And again, thanks for being here. Take care.
Thank you so much. Have a lovely weekend. Thanks for having me.
Bye all.